I think compute is going to be like basic necessities of human beings, right? Like if you are relying on compute for everything, for intelligence, which is the scary part, you're going to need some allocation of compute. And you're going to need some currency to represent that allocation of compute. And Akash is the currency of compute.
Welcome to the Never Die Podcast, your weekly crypto alpha for those who never quit. Today I have Greg, the founder of Akash, on the podcast, and we're diving into all things Akash, AI, compute, and more. We talk about why Akash is vastly different than things like Ionet and Render, why permissionless and decentralized networks have unique properties that allow them to grow far larger, scales larger than their permissioned counterparts. Think of things like a private server versus something like the internet. Why I call Akash the internet of compute, and why I believe if it's successful, it has the potential to be a multi-trillion dollar network and a ton more. We cover a lot of things in this episode. It's a really interesting and in-depth episode, especially if you're interested in Akash, GPUs, compute, AI, etc. Let's dive in. All right, today we have Greg, the founder of Akash, on the podcast. Welcome, Greg. It's great to have you back.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Great to be back.
I wanted to do this follow-up podcast on Akash because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there on Akash that I've seen in the space. Specifically, I think because I've made a lot of Akash content and put it out there, I get a lot of people talking about, hey, here's this similar Akash competitor, or like, what do you think about like Render versus Akash? And like, this is why this is better. This is why this is better. And I wanted to fill in some of those gaps and kind of just like take a second look at what Akash is to maybe give people a deeper understanding, because there is so many competitors out in the space. And I believe personally that Akash really stands on its own 2 feet as like something very, very different than these other things. But I think for the average person, it could be really, really confusing. Actually, before we do that, for the average person who hasn't heard anything about Akash, can you just give like a brief overview of it?
So Akash is the world's first supercloud. What a supercloud means is it is an aggregation layer on top of compute, cloud-capable compute, be it private, be it public, regardless of what type of compute it is. Akash is a aggregation layer that looks and feels like a typical cloud for a user, but gets its supply from a distributed clusters globally spread across, right? Most of the compute comes from underutilized data centers. And most of the compute today tends to be these accelerated computing type of units, which are basically called GPUs, right? The demand for AI is driving that sort of like profile. But Akash is a decentralized, permissionless, and fully open source, the only open source cloud really out there, right? There's nothing else. All the new ones are closed. The only open source cloud, and the first attempt at something this magnificent, right? We were the first one since we had to break ground. I mean, we began working on Akash about 9 years ago exactly. I mean, funny enough, today is the 9th year anniversary for Overclock Labs, the company that created Akash. And when we began creating Akash, obviously we were deep in the infrastructure space. I mean, our backgrounds go all the way to Kubernetes and foundational technologies that created the cloud native infrastructure. Some of the code we worked on for that is currently in Akash is used by companies like NVIDIA to write Kubernetes drivers for GPUs. So they use our code and we use their code. That's the beauty of open source software. So the protocol launched about, we wrote the white paper in about 2018 we published. We've been working on it since 2016, on the protocol itself. And the code itself was, the first line of code we wrote in 2013. So it's been over 10 years. And today is live and growing and amazing. It's powering amazing set of protocols. I mean, a recent one is Venice protocol, a decentralized chat application similar to ChatGPT by Eric Voorhees. Eric Voorhees is one of the, OGs of crypto and someone like that using Akash because of its permissionless, because of its open source nature, is and talking about it publicly, right, is such an incredible testament to the software and the stability of the platform. So, and Akash today is the de facto platform for decentralized AI, and any live, real decentralized AI projects, be it Flock.io, which is doing federated learning, they use Akash, they did a demo. Prime Intellect, which is also taking different stab at federated learning, integrated Akash, did a live demo of Akash. We saw, protocols like News Research, which is a very prominent, AI teams training some of the new models on Akash. So we see quite a lot of real AI projects that have incorporated Akash and give live demonstrations. And it's a big difference, right? A lot of the others talk about partnerships and talk about a lot of announcements, but no one really shows the work. So I guess Akash stands in its own way because of its open source nature, right? It's permissionless nature and other good stuff.
Yeah, and I want to lean in that really quick and just give somebody, maybe the people that don't understand some of the complexities of that, like a really easy mental model. Is a decentralized permissionless version of like Amazon's AWS. It's a lot of people have said if Amazon AWS were to spin off as a company, it's a multi-trillion-dollar company. A lot of the infrastructure of the internet is built on Amazon AWS, but it's centralized and it's permissioned. And I want to really emphasize, I think, for people, because this is so difficult for a lot of people to understand, that there's this huge value unlock when you have something that's decentralized and permissionless. And the example I like to give a lot would be like a private server versus something like the internet. Okay, they're very similar in the way they function, but very, very different in the scale that they achieve. Another example would be a lot of people call blockchains just giant spreadsheets in the cloud. And that's, something like Bitcoin, it really is like just a giant ledger, just a giant spreadsheet.
Well, the big difference, I'll tell you what the big difference is. The big difference is a giant ledger anyone can write to.
Yes. And so that's what I was going to say is a spreadsheet, right? You have a spreadsheet. That doesn't accrue any value. If I had a spreadsheet with like Jesse dollars, right? Or if you had Greg dollars on a spreadsheet, nobody cares. Like that accrues no value. But something that's decentralized and permissionless, like a blockchain, that accrues this huge value mode. And the same thing would be like, you could say JPEGs versus NFTs. Like there is a certain property that something inherits when it becomes decentralized and permissionless that allows it to accrue a lot more value than its counterpart. And so if you look at something like Amazon AWS, centralized and permissioned, versus something like Akash, decentralized and permissionless, it's this whole new thing that I like to kind of think of it in my mental model as like an internet of compute. And it's something that people can come build things on top of, like Venice, et cetera. And so maybe that's a really easy mental model for a person to kind of understand why Akash matters when we have things already like AWS.
Right. So in a simple look at history, right? Like look at AOL versus World Wide Web. Internet was not invented by World Wide Web, right? Internet came long before World Wide Web. In fact, DARPA was the first sort of like inventor of the internet, you can claim. But internet took about 30 years to get popular, and it got popular because of AOL, which is very centralized, very gated, and they saw the opportunity, they jumped on the opportunity, and they, amassed a lot of value and all the good stuff. It's centralized. But when www came, the World Wide Web standard, a decentralized or based on TCP/IP protocol, which is also a open protocol, internet was able to achieve its current success. Without that, you're going to be, under control of AOL, and that never really, it took off in a short period, but it never really achieved its true potential, what the internet today is. And that's a big difference. That's why decentralized systems, when you have no single entity controlling, when the playing field is level to all the participants, unlocks incredible amount of value that's beyond what is even possible today, right? So a lot of people's mental model is really biased around what they can see and what they can understand. But when you really have to put some context into picture, the mental model changes, right? So I think that's why people have trouble understanding why Akash, being open source and being decentralized, has significant potential to capture more than Amazons of the world because they don't understand, right? So it's funny enough, a lot of people, you can get into competition and whatnot. Funny enough, a lot of people compare Render with Apple. I'm like, wow, Apple is closed source. Apple is, not decentralized. And you cannot compare a company with a protocol. A company's primary mission is to enhance its shareholder value. A protocol's primary mission is to enhance its users' value. It's a huge difference. A company has to answer to the board. A protocol doesn't need to answer to anyone. It needs to answer, in fact, people that use the protocol answer to themselves. So communities over companies is what the fundamental difference should be in terms of how people look at or perceive these protocols. And nothing wrong with being a company, but claiming to be decentralized when you're a company is just grifting, right? Then taking advantage of the, I would say, like information asymmetry and taking advantage of the people that may not be in a position to evaluate actual technology behind a claim. And the worst is our entire industry supporting it, like be it venture capitalists to exchanges supporting that claim.
And that's why it's important that people understand why things that are decentralized and permissionless have an inherently different value. You gave a great example with AOL versus the internet. Another example would be like Facebook business pages. You don't see anyone building trillion-dollar businesses on those. But lots of people built trillion-dollar businesses on the open, permissionless internet. And so you could go on and on and on. There is a very special property when it comes to these things that enables innovation, entrepreneurs, and a lot of building to happen.
Yeah, Linux versus Unix.
Yeah.
Linux is used by 97% of the world. It runs the internet. Unix, even though it was the first one, and probably, the most used one before Linux even existed, slowly lost its share. Why? Because it is permissionless. Linux is open source is permissionless technology, right? You don't need to seek anyone's permission to use Linux, or you don't need to seek anyone's permission to change the protocol, the code, modify it the way you want it to be, and build business on top of it, right? So, and that's why it's important. People need to look at what are businesses being built on top of Akash today? Like we saw Venice.ai being built. We have, Brev.dev, which is a very popular machine learning as a service or fine-tuning as a service being built on Akash, right? You're seeing several, NodeShift, another company being built on Akash, actual businesses making money being built on Akash. And those are some of the, I guess, indications, because business is it's no bullshit, right? It's not partnering, and a lot of these don't have tokens, right? They don't care about tokens. They're just there because they need GPUs in a reasonable manner, and they need guarantees that they're not going to be taken away from them.
I get a lot of people, Greg, saying, but what about Ionet? Ionet has, I don't even know, 30,000, they claim 30,000 million GPUs, and Akash only has like a much smaller amount. So wouldn't Ionet be inherently a way better platform than Akash? What would you say to that? Because I get that all the time.
All I'll say is there are a few things about Ionet, right, that obviously are public knowledge by now. First thing is they are known to lie publicly, especially about 1 million GPUs. They said they have, and when we pointed out, and I pointed out privately and publicly, they basically said that's true. So in January, I pointed out. In November, I pointed out that these numbers don't look good. There's even public record. But they failed to take action. But all of a sudden, when Martin Shkreli pointed out that, hey, these numbers don't look good, Martin obviously has a bigger audience than I do, then they claim they got attacked, cyber attack. There's possibly some truth to it, but if I'm building a platform and if I see 4 times more A100s than Meta has, I would not advertise that, because the suspicion is obviously, doesn't matter if I'm hacked or not. If I'm literally seeing 100,000 A100s on my platform, that's 5 times more than Meta. You don't have to be a genius to suspect something is off. And if you're advertising that, you're complicit. I mean, so we don't know what's true, what Ionet says. It's closed source. There's no way to verify. There's nothing on blockchain. It is a web application with a login password that you use Google or other SSO providers. And there's no way to verify what they have, what's not, right? So they have this proof of compute. Well, is it open source? Not, right? So is the platform open source? Not. Is anything verifiable? It's not. So they can claim all they have, all that's great, but it's none of the stuff works. None of the stuff is open source. So it's very hard to say what works and what doesn't work. And second, it'll assume the platform works, right? Assume that platform works. What they also made a major claim that they solved federated learning. Now, granted, you could say it's the founder, Shadid Ahmad, who's no longer part of the company, but that's a big claim they made, that they solved federated learning. Federated learning on heterogeneous GPUs. So mark my words. Now, no one solved federated learning on heterogeneous GPUs, right? So you can have clusters.
What is that? What is federated learning?
So what is federated learning is this, right? So AI right now needs homogeneous GPU for training AI. It needs homogeneous GPUs that are connected with a very low latency. And what that means is you need same type of GPUs. In the sense, if you're training on H100s, it has to be H100s located in the same data center, ideally located on the same chip because of latency, because that's how neural networks work for training. Latency means the distance between two chips to communicate. If it's higher, it takes longer to train. While it's possible to train over geographically distributed clusters, it's not practical because it takes much longer. That means it takes significantly higher cost to train. So what training predominantly does is it requires the same type of GPUs and that are locally available as close as possible, right? Now, there's a lot of research around this subject on how to leverage globally distributed GPUs. Google DeepMind wrote a paper called Dialoco in December. This is considered to be one of the toppest research. There are, I would think, at least 3 companies or protocols working, or 4 protocols working on solving this problem. Jensen is an incredible protocol. They're trying to solve federated learning or heterogeneous. They haven't solved it. And these are PhDs. These are amazing teams, right? They're decentralized protocol, well-funded by industry and whatnot. And then you have Prime Intellect, you have Flock.io, you have even News Research. They're all trying to solve this problem, just to give you a context. But Ionet founder Shadid Ahmad claimed out of the box that he solved this problem. And we asked him how he did it. He said it's proprietary technology. There's even a Twitter thread, happy to send it to you, right, where I was discussing with him, like, how did you solve this? And he's like, oh, well, it was just horrible response. Okay, so that's the founder right there. And so they have these like distributed clusters all over the world, but why would anyone use them? Because they're useless. And they went and did this Airdrop, essentially points or whatnot, to get those GPUs. I mean, they incentivized, obviously, supply. There's nothing wrong with it. But they did not anticipate a Sybil attack in the sense like, oh, when you incentivize someone without verifying what resources they have, well, you're going to end up in, fraud. And that's crypto one-on-one, right? So obviously now they claim that they are a victim of a fraud because of, points, not having the foresight of Sybil attacks, fine. And now they still list they have some 800,000 GPUs that are not verified on the platform. So if they know those GPUs are false, why even advertise?
Okay. So to summarize, essentially, they did an airdrop initiative and they got Sybil farmed. Pretty classic, happens with all airdrops, where a lot of people were saying, hey, they're supplying A100s or whatever, but they weren't really that. Like they were somehow tricking their system into thinking it. And they were kind of, from your viewpoint, they should have been able to verify this. They didn't do the checks and balances that they should have to verify this. And because of that, they list like a massive amount of these GPUs. And in reality, like most of them are there just to airdrop farm. And the ones that are there aren't what they say they are. These are like,
Right.
Right. And the
So
entire,
now they have verification. They claim they have verification. They claim, but it's not open source. So we don't know what's real, what's not. And we don't know how often are they being verified, because I can literally say, I can come, put a GPU. I can say this GPU belongs to the network. I can take the same GPU, register again and again. There's no way to know, right? So even the verification, because verification is a very difficult problem. Trust me, we have PhDs working on this problem. We have MIT PhDs working on this problem. It's not an easy problem. So they solved a verification on a weekend with every other claim they make about solving heterogeneous string. So I would say Shadid Ahmed is a complete fraud. And there's public information available. The fact that he resigned from his position without addressing allegations means he's a fraud. There's no doubt about it. Like either he addressed the allegations or without, Tory, I like Tory Green, who's a co-founder and CEO. He's a gentleman. I think he took over the reins from Shadid. He has a massive challenge ahead of him to solve. They're doing a good job with hiring. Tory's a gentleman. So, so that's what Ionet is. Now, I don't know anyone that uses Ionet. They have all these fake partnerships, but no one actually uses them. And we know how partnerships go in crypto.
So I'll highlight, you're not the only one saying this. Like you mentioned Martin and a few other people on Twitter who are calling them out for what appeared to them. And what you're saying is fake numbers. And so let's move on from Ionet, okay? Because I feel like that's the same stuff I've seen on Twitter. What about Render? So another comparison I get a lot is Akash versus Render. And like Render's they have the biggest market cap. A lot of people claim that they're like buddy with like NVIDIA for some reason. I'm not really sure what the story is behind that. But how would you compare those two? And what would you say to somebody that's trying to say, well, what's the difference here? They're honestly trying to assess what's the difference here and why is Akash maybe differentiated from what Render's doing?
Yeah. So Render is not fraud like Ionet, right? I mean, Render is a little more real. And the big difference between Render protocol and Akash is such, right? Render is close to $5 billion FDV, and it's one of the top protocols, and it's fully closed source. So we don't know, again, what is happening. There is no blockchain behind the old Render network, and the new Render migrating Solana, there is some indication they're moving to a blockchain. The old Render network, there's no blockchain behind it. It is a client-server application. Most of the servers are hosted on, most of the servers that maintain the coordination layer is hosted on Google. They were very open about it. And also you need a OTI, which is the company behind Render, subscription to use the Render network. So it's not permissionless, not even close to permissionless. And it is a rendering product. And OTI makes these rendering products, which is supposedly popular. I mean, it's obviously they get a lot of mentions by Apple in their keynotes. They've been around for a long time. Jules is a founder. He's has some prominence in the 3D rendering world, but when it comes to AI, they claim they have AI, but you have zero users using Render protocol for the AI, right? And a lot of the GPUs that apparently Render provides Ionet is Render providers installing Ionet directly on their compute, and providing directly to Ionet, but not going through Render protocol. So the Render protocol per se is not open source. It's not permissionless. It's not usable by anyone. It's really meant for rendering 3D models. It's not usable for AI. So I think Render took advantage. I mean, Render, again, a lot of marketing, right? They have an old relationship with NVIDIA. Because of the rendering, focus, because NVIDIA has been providing them chips for rendering for a long time. And of course, they're playing their card really well, right? So that is only time. I mean, it's not, and they have this claim about Apple partnership, but Apple recently announced AI, fully open AI integrated. No one talked about Render, no one cared about Render. So their whole premise of existence is they have a partnership with NVIDIA and have a partnership with Apple. For OTI, yes, OTI as a company that does rendering products that have real customers and, and buys chips, great partnership. But AI, not. So that's a big difference between Akash and Render. It's just that, now they're I believe they're trying to move to Solana. It's going to take a long time for them. They have the burn mint. They don't advertise or they don't disclose any of the numbers, right? I mean, why don't they disclose revenue? Why don't they disclose how many GPUs they have? Why don't they disclose any of the information, right? So it's again, I think there are like two ecosystems in decentralized AI world right now that's clearly forming. Once you have the closed, permissioned ecosystem, which is Render, Ionet, and a bunch of others. And then you have open, permissionless, open source ecosystem, which is Jensen, Akash, Prime Intellect, Ritual, and a bunch of others that, some are competing with each other. I would say like, yes, we do have competition within the open itself, but there's a clear distinction between closed ecosystems and open ecosystems. And that's a big difference. And Render, Ionet, and another one called Aether, all closed source, right?
So maybe a good way to frame it for the average person would be, if you think of something like Airbnb, okay, centralized company, but if like in order to get more people to list houses, they were giving out some sort of token incentives and saying, hey, we have this token, we'll pay you a little extra to put your house up on the market. We're a centralized company, we're closed source, but we use a token to kind of incentivize people to put stuff up. And then on the side, they're kind of tapping into this AI narrative saying, hey, originally a 3D rendering company. I remember that. And now they're kind of pivoting into the AI narrative, which I think I've seen a lot of people doing that. And they're saying, hey, we're going to do some stuff in AI, but that hasn't really been fleshed out or realized in its current form. That's something that they're moving towards. But again, this is a centralized company basically using token incentives to attract more people to list their GPUs.
I mean, token incentives is completely controlled by the OTI team too. It's not even like, yeah, it's just a company with a ERC token. The token has no relation with the product, like no relation. You don't need the token to use the product. You can actually go right now use Render without a token. All you need is an OTI subscription.
I feel like those were both great answers, and that's the same conclusion I came to. Is good hearing it from you. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about compute. I've heard a lot of takes about compute saying that compute's going to be like the main bottleneck for AI, but I've heard other people make takes saying that actually compute's going to be fine. We're going to release new chips. We're going to scale. That's not going to be a problem. It's going to be energy that's the bottleneck for AI. And I've heard compelling arguments for each. I'm curious where you fall.
What's next? Sand?
What's that?
Next is sand. Not enough sand in the globe to make the chips.
I think everyone's trying to figure out. They're trying to guess. Right now, compute is the bottleneck. Do you see that continuing to be the bottleneck?
Everything is an abstraction over something, right? Like, so if you look at AI, which is an abstraction over software, models, which is abstraction over compute, which is abstraction over, like data center space, which is abstraction over energy, which is abstraction over, just physical sand to make the chips, right? So everything comes down to abstraction over abstraction, right? So compute is a current bottleneck. And I don't think it's going to be a bottleneck per se in terms of the current profile, right? So right now, it's a huge bottleneck because the supply chain hasn't caught up to the demand, right? The demand is gaining exponentially and the supply is not increasing. Several factors, NVIDIA being the sole provider for AI for the most part, and other chips are just catching up to just the supply chain being in Taiwan, and there's geopolitical aspects of, not increasing their supply. There is quite a lot of vectors that are contributing to the supply chain issues right now. Now, if AI, and AI will, as predicted by Gartner, AI compute is predicted to have 5% of global GDP by 2030, I believe. If that's the case, and I believe that's the case, you're going to see supply chain ease out, right? It has to, because it's just nature right? So, yeah, I think next 5 years we're going to see the supply chain catch up a bit. I mean, we're still there's still unknowns because every time you have a new, it's like Nvidia is doing such an incredible job in making sure the supply chain doesn't catch up because it's in their best interest, right? So they're releasing new chips every 18 months, and every time they release a new chip means which is usually faster. Now you have the Blackwells, which are faster than the H100s, right? The B100s supposedly can do the same job for training a model 30 times faster. I mean, within 30% of the time that a H100 takes. So obviously the new chips are getting faster and faster. And when you are a company, you always want the new chips. But every time there's a new chip, there's at least an 18-month wait from TSMC, which is the manufacturer of the chips, to retool to the new process. You can't just have a new chip and have it on the market, right?
Yeah. Wouldn't it be
as long as
wouldn't it be that every time, in my mind, okay, a new chip comes out, we have way more capacity. Don't the models just get faster, and then with the models being faster, there's new use cases, and with
Correct.
new use cases, there's more demand, and then we're back where we started.
Correct. So exactly. So the demand, I mean, the AI is not anywhere close to as fast as it should be, right? Like it's getting faster, but if you use ChatGPT, you see how slow it is, right? It's getting faster and faster and faster. And ChatGPT is also kind of dumb in so many cases, right? Like it's gotten dumb with coding, it's gotten dumb with a lot of things. So we're seeing this crazy evolution of these models right now. There's no saying that it's going to be one model or another model. And that's challenging for chip designers, right? Because chips now had to be generic enough, the GPUs had to be generic enough to support different types of models. And you can go in the route of making ASICs, which are faster for performing certain jobs, which can ease the supply chain. So I think the factors that are contributing to this crazy shortage is, well, the models are getting faster. The chips are getting faster from NVIDIA. The models are catching up and getting faster. The models are getting smarter too with multimodal technologies and whatnot. And that means newer chips, are required, or general purpose chips are required. That means you can't replace a general purpose GPU with a ASIC, which is more specialized, which can solve the supply chain issues. So that means general purpose is going to keep going and going. So we don't know for sure when exactly this supply chain crisis is going to solve, because things are moving very, very fast, both on the chip design, both on the model design, and the users and adoption. Now we have 1 billion new devices that are going to come online with ChatGPT, and Apple is a very serious player, right? And Apple sets the standard for the globe, right? So when that's going to happen, I don't even know where we are going to be with AI, right? So yeah, so we're not slowing down anytime soon, and it will get solved someday, but it's not in sight at this point. I think we predict 3 to 5 years we'll start seeing some ease of use.
And I think it's important to remember it's not just AI that uses compute. Everything uses compute, and more we're putting compute into new things, right? It's everything, metaverse, gaming, like anything you think of, it's going to require compute, and it does require compute, and it's requiring an increasing amount of compute. Because again, anytime you have new compute capabilities, people come up with new use cases to utilize those capabilities, make things faster, make bigger, crazier things. Did you see the interview where Sam Altman was saying that he, instead of universal basic income, he thinks maybe it could be something like universal basic compute for every person? Do you see that?
Yeah. I think compute is going to be like basic necessities of human beings, right? Like if you are relying on compute for everything, for intelligence, which is the scary part, you're going to need some allocation of compute, and you're going to need some currency to represent that allocation of compute. And Akash is the currency of compute. It's the first one, and it's the oldest one, and it keeps going, right? So I think compute. That also means that compute should be separated from state, right? That means just like how we have, a separation of money from the state with Bitcoin, separation of intelligence from the state is going to be very critical as well. Because if compute becomes such a basic, fundamental need, and state is trying to get very active in controlling compute, right? Now they are proposing KYC requirements, they're proposing all kinds of crazy things. Because they know that compute is going to be a basic necessity. I think I mean, I agree with Altman. I disagree with Altman in so many different things, but I agree with Altman that a universal basic compute will be a thing of the future. And those who have compute will have higher chances of surviving what's coming.
Yeah, because you think about, in the U.S. at least, like there was this idea with the founding fathers that we don't want all the guns in the hands of the military and the government. We want people to be able to fight back if they need to, because governments tend to become oppressive over time and don't treat their citizens well. Well, you think about with AI, the kind of things that they could do with that level of intelligence, and if people don't have a means, and the open market does have a means to fight back against that, that's like 1984 or whatever. Like that's a very bad outcome, I think, for everyone. And so
has my shirt, it says,
come and take
my GPU.
Yes.
Right. Inspire the Gonzalez flag of Texas Republic.
And I think it's more important than people realize. And that's why, like, you can't have it all in the hands of just Amazon or a couple of these centralized providers. You really do need this concept of an internet of compute, this permissionless. It's like a different flavor of the internet, right? It's a different kind of internet. Now that we have the internet, we're getting all these different flavors. I feel like blockchains, Bitcoin is like this internet of money. It's this different kind of concept. What you're building is this internet of compute. It's a different kind of concept. And we need this globally as like a resource for humanity that they can tap into, a resource for open source builders that they can tap into. And it's not just about like making money. It's not just about building cool tech stuff. I think it's about the future of humanity and the way that future looks like. Is it going to be a dystopia or is it going to be a utopia? And I think it hinges on who controls the compute and who controls the intelligence.
I agree. It's and people are actively trying to control, right? The GPUs right now, and it's very scary if you think about it. It's very scary. Yeah, if we don't do something about it, we'll end up in a feudalistic society. The ones that have the power of AI will have the power over society. And that's how feudalism was. And we let people gain power without checks. And unfortunately, with the technologies that we have, we'll be able to prevent a feudalistic society.
I think if our founding fathers were alive today, one of the amendments would be the right to personal compute, the right for the people to have compute, because it really is that important. Just right up there with the right to bear arms, the right to compute.
I agree. That's why I have a constitution document here.
I love it.
To remind ourselves what the founding fathers wanted. And, I think if you look at America's founding, there's a lot of parallels in freedom and sovereignty and liberty, right? So, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's very, very important that this foundational aspect that the fabric that holds humanity together is decentralized and not in control of a single entity or a single person, be it elected or unelected. And all of us, we don't realize that all of us pay an Amazon tax. Like there was a report by Andreessen Horowitz that was published a while back that analyzed all the S1 filings, or the filings that you file when you go public, of SaaS companies, Dropboxes and Netflix of the world, and they analyze about 50% on average of all the fees that you pay to these online services, be it Netflix, goes to a cloud provider, be it Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. So if you believe you use a lot of online services, a lot of that goes to a provider. And when it comes to GPUs, almost all of it goes to a cloud provider. Almost all of it, right? Like ChatGPT, they were huge on Amazon and Microsoft now, I suppose, right? Microsoft provides them the biggest cloud. So a lot of your money goes to Microsoft, right? And it's funny now, with the new world, it's like, I don't even know what the implications are. I haven't really sat and thought out, but if you think about 1 billion devices having ChatGPT that is personalized, that means the data needs to leave your device and go to ChatGPT, which is controlled by OpenAI, which in turn goes back to Microsoft. So we all pay a Microsoft tax without realizing we're paying a Microsoft tax. while using an Apple device. And who has a say? You and I don't, right? We're just the bottom of the food chain here.
That's crazy.
Controlled by our new lords. And it's crazy to think about how fast these things are moving, and we're here not focused on the right problem, instead building things that are replicating old structures, closed software, same things over and over again. We're just building another Amazon, right? If you're building closed software.
I always think about the idea that like how much media impacts us, how much our leaders impact kind of the way we think. And then I think about AI and all the data. So look at Apple, Microsoft, like you're talking about, all the data they'll have on you as an individual. And then think about how AI can personally nudge you in to a certain belief or to a certain idea. Like the idea of like, sort of like this psychological warfare or, propaganda in a country goes to a whole different level that I think I've heard people talk about, but I really think it could get out of control where when you can individually administer propaganda to a specific individual while having all this data on them, at what point, are your thoughts and what you're thinking and your beliefs your own versus something you've been slowly kind of corralled into?
There was this famous saying in Soviet Russia, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Right. With AI, that's going to be 1,000 times easier.
Yeah.
You can literally craft a crime by looking at someone's data. And if you think, with the current situation is dire in the United States, right? We are jailing political opponents. We are jailing, speech expressionalists. We're jailing people that say the wrong thing. It's in a scary, scary situation. And imagine what that's going to look like with AI. Because AI is just faster at doing everything, right? In the hands of a bad guy, it's just faster at being a bad guy.
Yeah.
In the hands of a good guy, it's just faster at being a good guy, right? So you can literally take someone's life apart and be like, find me a crime in this person's life, and it'll give you like that, right? So legislation is not going to catch up. And I'm genuinely scared. And that's why one of the reasons I was at the Hill fighting to keep AI open source, because when AI is open source, we can at least point out saying that this was used, against a victim, and we can easily point out, we can easily trace it back, right? If it's closed, we don't know what exactly is going to happen when Apple devices get OpenAI, because all that data is opaque. What's going to OpenAI, what's then going to Microsoft, what is, there's no say in any of our, there's no say in how we're being used as a fodder to train this massive engine. So as much as I hate government intervention, but I think clearly this is one of those situations whether we as a decentralized community come together and solve this problem ourselves, understanding the problem, or the state is going to solve this problem in a terrible way because they're not good at doing anything, right? So we're fighting the fight, but I think it's not enough, right? And it's scary.
Switching to maybe more of a positive note, let's fast forward 20 years and say like Akash is this massive success. You have basically this vast ocean of compute available to be tapped into permissionlessly. In the future, people don't want to own their own compute, or like there's like Bitcoin mining facilities, but they're for compute. And so you have this internet of compute built on top of Akash. What sort of apps or what sort of things in your mind get built on top of that?
People have compute. They just don't have the know-how to participate in a global network. First of all, we need to solve that, right? We need to make it extremely easy for a home computer, to be part of the network by a non-technical person, right? And unfortunately, the situation right now, the stack is extremely complex to say a home PC to someone with a home PC to install Kubernetes, install the all the entire stack, be it observability, be it DNS, be it like storage, be it the aspects of a cloud capable compute in a single click, and be getting that easier and easier and easier, right? And then you have on the tenant side, well, the big challenge is crypto, right? So folks that understand crypto, Akash is beautiful. It's super simple to use. It's one of the best platforms. But folks that don't understand crypto, Akash is a alien technology, right? It's, well, you got to get these tokens, and it's very, very high friction. So we got to solve friction on both sides, primarily on the usage and then on the provider side, right? So really unlock the capability. And what that means is, well, we have game stations at home. I mean, we have PlayStations to Xboxes with highly capable GPUs that are not utilized. I have a Mac Studio at home that I use for my desktop, highly capable GPUs that are not used, right? And installing a daemon is not an answer. I mean, you need cloud capability in the sense you need storage, you need all these facilities for it to be usable. Not just installing a little daemon and then putting that GPU as part of the network and calling it a day, because that GPU is useless, right? So there's this challenges, I think, from a technology standpoint that will get solved and are getting solved when you have a protocol like Akash that take a very long-term outlook instead of taking shortcuts to pump the numbers. And then the applications truly are like, well, Venice is a beautiful application, right? Venice AI, I mean, and built by an incredible person, Eric Voorhees, because someone that has that value set, you can imagine what kind of products they're going to build, and rightfully so. I use Venice a lot more than ChatGPT now, right? Knowing that my data is on a decentralized cloud, knowing that it is permissionless and doesn't capture any of my information, and knowing that's very, very capable, right? So Venice, and you see News, you see a lot of these protocols now being built in Akash are doing higher order functions, right? So Akash doesn't do federated learning by itself. You need something like a prime intellect on top of Akash to do federated learning, right? But I'm glad we're using Akash GPUs because we know that it's decentralized, right? So I think it's going to be quite a lot of the decentralized stack that's going to be powered by Akash. And we're also seeing some centralized stack, be it Brev or whatnot, right? That's being powered by Akash, and we're going to see quite a lot of centralized stack solving as well, because without centralization, you don't get the users that are not pro crypto, right? You still know those users, and in order to get demand for the network for its longevity. So I think if we can decentralize at least a compute layer, we have a much better chance at decentralizing the entire stack versus if you don't decentralize this base level layer, we're going to be having trouble, right? So, of course, next is power, right? So we're not stopping at compute. I mean, I'm touring power facilities and I'm touring, it's way more challenging to decentralize power than compute, but it is not out of the reach.
Wait,
right?
Akash is going to try to do like a decentralized power network?
Not going to say any of that, but it's like, I'm very interested in figuring out a solution how to decentralize power, especially renewables, especially in Texas, right? Texas has its own jurisdiction when it comes to its own grid. So it's easier to experiment in Texas than America. America is very, very regulated when it comes to power, right? There was an attempt at creating a power market by a company called Enron. They messed up, but I think there's another opportunity to create a truly decentralized power market. Like really, people haven't looked into it because it's too closed off. But that's an area that if you can decentralize the access to the power, that's one step better than decentralize the actual creation of power. And then we have enough incentives, we can create decentralized power grids. And I think that's one of the ways you can take over, solve our power problems. I mean, Texas has got so much barren land, so much land available for solar, right? And I have friends of mine that do feasibility analysis. So we're looking at identifying areas that can generate enough solar capability to put data centers there that can, effectively reduce the cost of power, because it's extremely expensive to power a data center. It's not the chips themselves. I mean, chips themselves take quite a lot. I mean, like a 4090 here takes about 450 watts, right? But it's the cooling that you need that takes a lot more power than your actual power for compute. So a lot of times, even though you may have a lot of sunlight, you may not have great cooling, and so it's vice versa. So it's a careful balance between where to put a data center. So we have feasibility studies, companies that do feasibility studies for this, and they sell information. So we're looking at okay, what is the next step, right? And power is going to be obviously in a big bottleneck, and in very themed to Akash, we're always going to look for the next thing, right? So even looking at quantum, right? There's quite a lot of work happening in quantum. We'll be announcing some things very soon. We have a researcher from MIT that is looking into quantum seriously for machine learning. So there's a lot of next things that we always look at, right? So we started looking at the GPUs in 2018, right? By the time we got GPUs in play, it was 2023, right? So we always have that outlook in terms of our research. And that's one of the things that separates Akash from the rest is we're not, the reason why we are first in so many different things is because we have that outlook, right? That forward-looking, that forward-thinking, and that sort of curiosity and what the next thing is.
So it sounds like you're saying that we're waiting on some problems to get solved. You said federated learning, that's got to get kind of fixed. We want to figure out a way to tap into people's home GPU, because there's actually an entire ocean of untapped GPU, and it's just about solving some of these technical hurdles to get tapped into.
We can tap into that if we can solve federated learning.
Okay. But once that happens, I mean, it's off to the races. At that point, it becomes really, really powerful to have this Internet of Compute network, and the things that can be built on it, who knows, decentralized models, centralized companies, just like the internet. You have, there's decentralized things, but there's a lot of centralized companies built on the internet, which is a decentralized network. And so it's really hard to say what it'll look like in 20 years, but the future's looking bright. And
that's why it's important, very, very important, to make sure you have incentive budget that's going to last when these technologies solve. A lot of problems we're seeing today is, to attract GPUs like Ionets and Aethers of the world, they're giving away tokens. That's not going to last very long, right? And without utilization, it's not like they have great, it's 1% utilization. It's not good. So there's no revenue coming, but they're just giving away because they need a big launch and they want the numbers up. And then what? Right? So you run out, and then the actual problems get solved because that's only going to take time. And when the problems are getting solved, you don't have enough GPUs because you don't have enough incentives. So it's very hard to be diligent and careful, but it's possible, right? If you have a longer outlook. And that's why we don't, numbers are good, but our utilization is high. And the way Akash works is every time there's over 50% utilization for a certain type of chipset, there are more incentives that kick in that increase that utilization. So very diligent, right? It's not going and saying, oh, we have 1 million GPUs or whatever, 100,000 GPUs or whatnot. If we don't have utilization, we're not going to do that name. Even though it looks good on paper, it doesn't look good when you take a long-term view. So, we've been here for 9 years. We're not going anywhere. We're going to continue what we do because what we did so far got us to where we are. And we always have threats. We always have protocols. I mean, I've seen enough of this come and go, right? So many of them challenged our position, challenged our ways, but we always come out.
I always get a lot of people coming to me and saying, I like Akash, but it's already too big, and they're looking at it from an investing standpoint, and they're like, it's already too big. And I always tell them, you're wrong, because if Akash is successful, this is a multi-trillion-dollar network. You're talking about an internet of compute. They might fail. There's a good chance. It's a bold vision, But if they're successful, you guys are thinking too small. You're thinking of like this really small business model versus what they're thinking and building for, which is, again, this internet of compute, this bold concept that I don't think anyone fully understands at this point. But the world is kind of pivoting on this axis of like things are about to change rapidly, really fast when it comes to a lot of things happening in tech right now. And the world 5 years from now looks a lot different than the world does today. And I think few are prepared for that. So real quick, I just wanted to give some disclosures. Obviously, I hold a huge, massive stack of Akash, really bullish on it, as well as just wanted to say that none of this is investment advice. None of this is me saying or Greg saying that you should be buying Akash or anything like that. This really was just a deep dive into the tech side of what Akash is building, the importance of decentralized permissionless networks, why those are set apart and different from closed source permission networks, and why it is really important going into the future to have these networks and resources for humanity for the good of everyone, because I think the outcome without these things is actually pretty bleak. Anyway, Greg, it was great having you on and great talking to you again. And hopefully we can catch up again in a year or something like that as Akash keeps progressing and you have a bunch of new stuff to share.
Thank you so much, Jesse. This is fun.